Hello everyone, in this video we are going to see how to configure an Azure application gateway with Azure App Services. For that, we'll have to create few resources on Azure. We'll start with creating few app services. For that, I have created this script. This will create first a resource group, and after that a web application. I'm going to call it demo images, and then I'm going to create another web application. I'm going to call it demo videos. Now let me copy this and paste it on my Azure PowerShell. As you can see, the resources are getting created now. As you can see, we have created the resources. Now let me go into Azure portal and I'm going into resource groups, and here we have the resource group. As you can see, we have two app services in place. Now if we go into demo images and access it, we have the default page. Let me change that now, because when we are load balancing, we should be able to see the difference between these two applications, images and video app services. I'm going into editor. Alright, I'm going to rename this. Let's change that, and I'm going to add a maybe a h1 tag. Welcome to something like this. And then I'm going to create a folder here. Let me add images, and then I'm going to move this file. Alright, now I'm going back and I'm going into the resource group again, and then I'm going into demo videos, and then I'm going to do the same here as well. Alright, as you can see, I have created a folder and index.html that contains welcome to video server. Let me close this and go back. Now we can start to create the application gateway instance. I'm going to create a new resource and search for application gateway, and here we have it. I'm going to click create. Configuring an application gateway, it's we have a lot of configurations to do. I will be doing the configuration, and along the way I will be explaining a few concepts as well, such as front ends, roles and backend poles and HTTP settings and things like that. Now we have the resource group selected, and I'm going to call this app gateway 1. It really doesn't matter. And now we have to select the region. If I go back, and here as you can see, I'm creating these resources in East US region. I'm selecting East US region, and then we can select the tier. Since I don't need any web application firewall settings, standard v2 tier is okay for me, and I don't want any automatic scaling of this application gateway, and the default instance count is 1 is okay for this demo, and I'm not going to associate this with any availability zones. This is okay for me, and now we have to specify the virtual network. Application gateways reside in virtual networks always. And since we don't have any virtual networks, let me create one now. I'm going to call it vnet1. The default settings here, the address range that we have for this virtual network and the subnet that we have here, these look okay to me. As you can see here, we have associated a new virtual network and a new subnet for this application gateway to be deployed in. Now I'm going next into front-end configuration. I have found this image on Microsoft documentation, and this has all the components of an application gateway. Now let me go through these components one by one so that you have a better understanding when I configure them here. As you can see here, we have a front-end IP address. This could be a public one or a private IP address. You can use a private IP address when you're not exposing your load balancer to public internet. Basically, what you should understand here is that you should have one front-end IP address. And then we have listeners. These are the listeners of the front-end IP address. When you're creating a listener, you can specify the domain name and the port. What that means is that with application gateways, you can host multiple sites. You can create listeners, let's say to abc.com, abc.net separately, and then you can host two websites with one application gateway. When you're configuring a listener, you should specify the port and the domain and a SSL certificate if you have plans to enable HTTPS. Now we understand what front ends are. We can have one front end and we can have many listeners. The problem that application gateway solves is that it will connect the front end with your backends. It does the load balancing, and that is the problem that it solves. So basically it connects the front end to backends. And here we have the backend pools. You can add multiple backend pools to one application gateway. And the rule is the component that connects the front end with your backend. Basically the listener with your backend. When you're creating the rule, you can specify few HTTP settings, such as the backend port number and session stickiness, whether this backend pool supports connection draining and things like that, also timeouts and things like that. So basically when you're creating a rule, you should specify a HTTP setting. And also you can create health probes with application gateway. For example, let's say one of your backends are not healthy. In that case, application gateway will not route traffic to that backend, and application gateway continuously monitors the health status of the backend pool. For enabling that, you can create health probes as well. It is kind of confusing when you get started because we have this HTTP setting separately from the rule and custom probe, and we have that because we can reuse this HTTP setting configuration. Now that we have a rough understanding of the components of Azure Application Gateway, let me move into a bit more complicated example. Actually, it's not complicated. The same things are here, but it shows a bit more complex configuration. As you can see here, we have one front-end IP address, can be private or public. As I explained earlier, we have multiple listeners for this front-end IP address. We have acme.com and we have, as you can see, many domains, and we have associated port 80 to the first listener and the second listener, but the third one we have associated port 443, and that is because this is a HTTPS, and when you want to make the listener an HTTPS listener, you have to specify the certificate as well. And the next level, the rules, as you can see, we have 3 rules in place. All those rules are connecting the listener with a backend pool. Listener 1 and listener 2 is pretty simple. It's the same thing that I have explained earlier. We have a rule, a backend pool, an HTTP setting, and a custom probe. But here in the listener 3, it is a bit more complicated. We have 2 backend pools. And this is the configuration that I'm going to show you in this video. Now, let me go back to the wizard that we were working on. And here, as you can see, we can specify the front-end IP address type. It can be a private one or a public one. I'm going to go with a public one. Now let me create that. We call it PIP1. All right. Now we have the front-end IP address in place. The next thing is backend configuration, and those are these things here. Let me add one backend pool, actually 2 backend pools, one for image servers and one for video servers. Now let me call it BP images, and I can add multiple backend targets. As you can see, I can add IP addresses directly, or virtual machines, or virtual machine scale sets, or app services. Since we are working with app services now, I'm going with app service. And as you can see here, we have all the app services shown here. I'm going to select demo images, and then I'm going to add this backend pool. And then I'm going to create another backend pool for videos. Let me call it BP videos. It is a app service just like before, and then I'm going to add that one as well. And now we have the configuration. As you can see, we have front ends, back ends, and routing rules. In the image that I have shown you, we have configured these components, and these components, now we have to configure these. I'm going into the wizard again, and I'm going to add a routing rule. All right, we can provide a name. I'm going to give rule 1, and then we can configure the listener, which is this one here. Let me call it listener 1, and then we can specify the front-end IP, and the protocol is HTTP. That is fine. As you can see here, we have additional settings. Since I am hosting only this site, basic is okay, and we can provide custom error page URLs when you receive these errors. These are common errors in Azure Application Gateway. I'm not going to configure them now, and as you can see, we have listener in place. Now we have to do backend configurations. And as you can see, we have target type backend pool, or we can do a redirection. Since I'm connecting with a backend pool, I'm going to go with this option here. And now we can select the backend target. And this is going to be the default backend pool. The next thing is we have to specify the HTTP setting. This one here, we can click add new, and I'm going to call it setting 1. Backend protocol is HTTP. It is okay for this demo, and port is 80. That's also fine. I'm not going to enable cookie-based affinity or connection draining. As you can see, we can specify these settings in the HTTP setting, and then we can reuse it. We can use for configuring the rule also our custom probe. If you look here, we can change the host header through the HTTP setting, and we are going to look into this one later. I'm going to add the HTTP setting. Now it's time for us to do the path-based routing configurations. Let me click on add path. I'm going to route the traffic that contains images to my image backend pool and videos to the video backend pool. Let me call it target 1. As you can see here, I'm going to reuse the HTTP setting I have created, and then I can specify the backend target. Let me select the image. Now let me select the image's backend target and add this. Alright, now let me add the second one, and this is going to be videos, and let me call it target 2, and I'm going to reuse the HTTP setting, and the backend target is bp_videos. Alright, now as you can see, when you are accessing the application gateway through this wildcard URL, all the traffic will be directed to BP images. But when you're accessing the application gateway with this one, all the traffic goes to BP videos, and that is what we have specified here. Now let me add this routing rule. Alright, I'm not going to add any tags here. Let me click next. Alright, now let me create the application gateway. Alright, that is getting created. Let's come back after around 10 minutes. As you can see, the application gateway deployment is complete. Now let me go into the resource. As you can see here, we have the front-end public IP address, and I'm going to copy the IP address, and then I'm going to open a new tab, and let's see what happens. I'm getting this error, bad gateway. This is a common error that we receive when we are configuring an application gateway. Now let's understand why we are receiving this error. Let me show you an image. This is the setup that we have. We have a virtual network, and inside of that virtual network, we have an application gateway, and this application gateway has a public IP address. From that, we can access the application gateway. And also we have configured a backend pool when we are configuring the application gateway to direct traffic from application gateway to an app service. But these are two separate services on Azure. An Azure Virtual Network and App Service, these are two separate services. And because of that, we should have some kind of a mechanism that allows the virtual network to access the app service. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to use service endpoints to do that. First, I'm going into the resource group, and then I'm going to refresh it. And here we have the virtual network. I'm going into virtual network, and then I'm going into service endpoints. Let me click add, and then I'm going to select Microsoft Web because this is the service type of our app services. And then I'm going to associate this service endpoint with the default subnet of my virtual network. We only have this subnet. Let me click add. What this will do is that this will route the traffic from your virtual network to the Azure App Service through Azure Backbone Network. This will take few seconds. As you can see, we have created the service endpoint. Now I'm going into the resource group again, and I'm going into demo images. And if I click here in the URL, as you can see here, I don't have permission to access the directory because we have created a separate directory and we have added the HTML file there. So let's see whether I can access it. Images/index.html. As you can see, I can access my demo images website. Since we are configuring an application gateway for accessing these servers, there's no point to make these servers public. And because of that, I'm going into networking of this app service, and we have three sections here: inbound traffic, web app, and outbound traffic. In the inbound traffic section, we have a access restriction that we can configure. It is called access restriction, but what we're going to do is we're going to allow the traffic from the virtual network, this virtual network, to the app service, and we are going to deny traffic from public internet or any other virtual network. Let me call it rule 1, and I'm going to allow traffic, and the priority 200 is okay. And the resource setting, this is a virtual network that we are allowing traffic from. I'm going to select virtual network. All the other settings it has configured by itself. All right, I'm not going to do any header changes. I'm going to add this rule now. As you can see, the rule that we have created is in place, but we have another rule that denies traffic from any other sources. Now, if I access the site now, we are getting forbidden message. We have added a access restriction to demo images app service. Let me do the same to demo videos as well. I'm going into networking and access restriction. Alright, I have added a service endpoint, as you can see here, and then I have added access restriction so that the public internet traffic will not reach our app service. Now let's see whether this works. It's still the same. I'm getting a bad gateway error. Let's see what we can do now. I'm going into the app gateway, and as you can see here, we have an error saying that we don't have any healthy backend pools. And now if I go into health probes, we don't have any health probes as well. Now let me add a health probe. This will continuously monitor your backend pools for the health status, and it will update the application gateway, and application gateway will only send traffic to healthy backend pools. Now let me provide a name here. I'm going to call it probe 1, and the host is going to be, alright, the path images/index.html, and this health probe will continually monitor the backend pool. This will send HTTP requests, let's say every 30 seconds. I'm going to change this to every 5 seconds. Now we can specify the HTTP setting here as well. Let's test this configuration. As you can see, both backend pools are healthy. Now let me click add. Alright, now if I go into backend health, it will take few seconds for getting this updated because it is doing a real-time check of your backend health. As you can see, we have 2 healthy backends. Now if I go into overview and click refresh here, even if I refresh this, we have this message here. I think this is because can take few minutes for updating these stats. Now let's try to access the application gateway now. As you can see, we are receiving an error, but it is not the same error. We are receiving a bad request and invalid host name. Why am I receiving this error? If I look here, and we are sending an HTTP request to application gateway, and application gateway is forwarding that request to an app service. App service is monitoring the host header of the HTTP request. Now let's see whether I can see it or not. I'm going into network section and then I'm going to refresh it. As you can see, if I go into the first one here and headers, and we have a host header. In the request headers section, we have a host header that contains the IP address, and application gateway is forwarding this IP address as the host header for the web apps as well. And because of that, we are receiving this message. I'm going back to the application gateway and I'm going into HTTP settings, and I'm going to select this HTTP setting here. And as you can see, we can override with a new host name. I'm going to enable this, and then I'm not going to manually provide a specific domain name. I'm going to go with the option pick hostname from the backend target. Because we have 2 backends, this is the right option. I'm going to save it now. Alright, I have saved the application gateway. Now let's see the message that I received now. As you can see, I'm getting a different error, and this error is coming from the app service. I don't have permission to see the root of the app service, and that is because I haven't added any index.html or anything there. Now let's see whether we can access this with the folder structure that we have created. we have created images / index.html. As you can see, we are getting the response from the image server. Let's change this to videos. As you can see, we are getting the response from our video server. And this is the end of this video. In this video, we learned about application gateway components such as listeners, rules, and HTTP settings and backend pools and things like that. And we saw how to configure an Azure app service to an application gateway. And while we're doing that, we learned how to troubleshoot and configure, and also we learned about service endpoints and access restrictions as well. If you have any further questions or comments, let me know down below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you learned something new today, and thanks for watching.